Adding the patient's view, please welcome actor and advocate Selma Blair, surgeon and TV host Dr. Oz, and Time 100 Health Summit co-chair Dr. David Agus.
Thank you, and welcome to both of you. You know, in the 1990s, so in 1996, there was a cover of Fortune magazine, and Andy Grove was on the cover. The following year, I'm in my laboratory at Sloan Kettering, and I'm a geeky little scientist with a lab that's literally the size of this. And there's a knock on the door, and he's there. And you know, that year was also Time Man of the Year. And he went on the cover of a magazine and said, "I've got cancer." Nobody did that at the time. And he was a remarkable hero for his transparency and how he did it. And there's a new generation of heroes. And obviously, Selma, what you did, you know, stepping out and, you know, saying, I have a disease, and not being embarrassed with, but living with it, and being a model for every other person who think they have the symptoms or has a disease is so powerful and so needed in this world. And obviously, Mehmet, you, when your mother is diagnosed with this horrible disease of Alzheimer's, and not keeping it inside, but actually talking to the world, being vulnerable, saying what you could potentially have done different is very meaningful, and I think that's why we're here today, is to talk about those. So Selma.
Yes.
Uh-oh, you're giving me a look.
Yes. Anticipation, no, thank you.
So you had a lot of years of symptoms leading up to it, and you know, looking back, would you have done something differently? What?
I would have, looking back, I would have asked for an MRI. I just didn't ask for that simple tool, and no one thought to give it to me. And, you know, before my son was born, I was definitely noticed, you know, a kind of rapid aging happening, you know, in my 30s. Mm-hmm. And that was very painful. And I burned all the time. You know, I just felt like I got arthritis or something, you know. I was very active, horse jumping. And I just thought, oh, I'd pinched a nerve, that's why I have numbness. I've always had a lazy eye, so what's one big deal if it goes blind one day? Like, I didn't really, you know, I just thought, well, human bodies are strange. I'm not a hypochondriac. I'm the one that's like, we're resilient. Right. You know, I just, so I after the birth of my son, it was incapacitating. I was done. I thought it was postpartum depression. And I went on antidepressants and, you know, got my life, was really conscious, had a macrobiotic diet and had someone making my food, really made an effort. I just felt worse and worse. And I did go to the doctor several times and had all my blood levels checked. They were all, I was malnourished, totally. And I just thought, okay, it's that. I'll get on, you know, the proper food, vitamin. But I would have just asked for an MRI when I stopped being able to use my leg. And I didn't. And my doctor would see me dragging my leg in, and I'd laugh about it, like, I guess I pinched a nerve, you know. But it was like kind of dramatic.
Well, listen, I mean, seeing you now and what you're doing, it's a beautiful thing to watch, how many lives you're impacting. It's so wonderful to interact with people and to realize that they had some shame about it. I mean, my only fear when I got it, I wasn't even scared or sad. I was saying yesterday to someone, I made some crocodile tears because I thought that's what you were supposed to do when you got a diagnosis, but I was actually relieved to at least feel like I was among you. Other people feel isolated. I felt like, oh, I have a human disease. I am human. So I felt like, oh, we'll take care of it. I also thought it would be fleeting, because I do know other actors that have it and they continue, and some are quiet about it. People have it and don't say anything. So, but my symptoms were kind of, you know, flamboyant, and you know, it just, I have glitches for me that, man, you know, and I had finally gotten a job and I had to tell them, and they were wonderful. Yeah. And then when I saw how much I actually needed help, I was like, oh, I have to thank these people. So that it really came out of that. And I also didn't want people to think I was drunk, because I have a history of that. So I'm sober and I'm so proud of it. So that was really the reason. I'd rather someone think, oh, she's gonna be in a wheelchair than she's opened the minibar. That was like better for me.
so, but I see other people really were so comforted that I wore a cane to a glamorous event, which I didn't even think about. I just didn't want to fall.
Right.
And that it means something to them. It's like, oh, well, I'm glad I'm useful now for a bit, because I do see so many people get so isolated in these chronic diseases.
You know, it's such a failure to the medical system that obviously for many years you went undiagnosed and had that stress, and I feel horrible about it. And obviously that has to change. And Mehmet, I mean, that's part of your story in a sense. You're one of the most celebrated doctors on this earth. And you had a mother that you diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and you look back and you said publicly that you saw the symptoms before and you feel horrible, you didn't do anything about it.
You know, it's much easier to recognize the symptoms when they're behind you on a huge screen and you're talking to everybody about what they ought to be looking for. But when it's in your own family, and I'm not alone, because I heard more feedback on this story than ever I would have imagined. And it's not just that there's 16 million people taking care of all the folks who are ill who have Alzheimer's, and there are about 5.5 million of those folks, but the deeper reality that we lost our truth in my family. And I think the biggest lies we tell, the lies we tell each other. And in our families, those lies are especially pervasive, because no one wants to be the sibling who puts their hand up and says, something's wrong with Selma over here. She's dragging her leg. Maybe someone should tell her to get an MRI scan, because her doctor's not doing that. And in my family, it's fed into a much deeper pathology, and it's all about trust. I mean, what is trust, right? Trust is knowing what to do and then doing it because you knew it was the right thing to do. In your case, you were let down because they didn't know the right thing to do. But in my case, I knew the answer and I didn't do it. Both of those are distrustful moves. And if you do both those things the right way, you end up with much better outcomes. I've learned so much about Alzheimer's that I didn't know not forget about TV, as a practicing clinician at Columbia University. And I recognize that if we start treating people as soon as they have Alzheimer's, we still miss the boat. Mm-hmm. Right? We need to figure out when they have plaque, because the plaque is the match. This is Rudy Tanzi's verbiage, is the match that leads to brush fire, which is the individual nerve cells dying, which leads to the forest fire of Alzheimer's with the inflammation.
That could be decades earlier is the problem.
Exactly, but we have now, as you know, the most exciting thing about Alzheimer's is the fact that we're actually being able to figure out, at least with some early tests, that you may get Alzheimer's. Forget about genetic testing, which everyone in this room should get.
Well, let's explain what that is. So there's a particular gene that you could test for how many copies you have.
He invented the things. He discovered these things. So explain it to everybody.
ApoE4 is a particular gene where...
He's telling me to explain it.
Good job.
It can tell your personal risk, but it's not deterministic, which means it's not going to happen. So if people always say, hey, I don't want to have that test, I don't want to know. But there's a beautiful NIH study called the REVEAL study that showed that knowledge is power, right? If you have that gene, it means someone in your family had Alzheimer's already. So we all in the back of our mind think we're going to get it. And actually taking action is powerful. So how have you changed with this? You know, obviously you took the genetic test.
So my mother is ApoE4E4, which is the worst of the combinations, which is why so many people in her family have Alzheimer's. I got one of her genes, and I got one of my father's genes, who's actually has a protective gene. Oh. So I net out, about average. But average isn't good enough, because 1 in 3 of us will get Alzheimer's. It's still the most feared disease we have. And so recognizing that, I started changing the numbers that I accepted. So as an example, I'm a heart doctor, so cholesterol numbers, I know exactly what I should do to prevent a heart attack. But the numbers for me are different, me personally, because I have this risk. Mm-hmm. And for many of you who have it as well, it's not good enough to tolerate an LDL cholesterol, what I was tolerating, above 100. You got to get stricter about it. In similar fashion, my belly fat quotient, I would not do well with diabetes. It would be a big problem for me. I benefit from omega-3 fats and B12 and folic acid. Some people would, some don't, but now I know, so I take them. And my mother is on a whole slew of stuff that I got her on, but I know already in my heart that I missed the boat. I can slow down her progression, but she's not going to be the sharp woman, the woman who's able to navigate almost any political scenario like she was when I was a child or a younger adult.
This summer, you went through one of the most aggressive and almost barbaric treatments we have in medicine, which is we call a stem cell transplant. And so it's aggressive chemotherapy to, in a sense, reset your own immune system. What was it like? I mean, you go in there, obviously MS symptoms, but then we hammer the hell out of you with a drug.
Yes. I haven't talked about it much yet because I've been wanting to show everyone that the proof is in the pudding, but my pudding is still kind of scrambled. So, so I don't want to scare people away. The disease modifiers didn't work for me at the time. And I was really declining more rapidly than I found acceptable. And it was strange. So someone mentioned Dr. Bird at Northwestern, and that someone also sent me there to see him. And I had no intention of doing it. I was like, I am not ruining my body, what's left of it. Why would I put this horrible drug in it? Chemotherapy, I don't have cancer, I don't need this horrible. But I was kind of out of options, and I was looking, and when he put me on a microdose of chemo months before the transplant to see how it worked, I immediately felt some relief. So I was like, whew, maybe I just have too much junk in there, and that killed some junk. Like, what do I care if it kills my whole body, because my whole body's like one big macrophage of yuck, just.
I like you using the medical terms. That's good.
It was very full. It couldn't take any more, viral overload, everything. So I did it, and I was warned, and you kind of make your plans for death. Told my son, I'm doing this, he would like me cremated. I'm here though, we don't have to worry about that. But it was, a little hard. I had a great support system, but you have more chemo than for cancer patients, because the aim is to kind of kill you. And it's the stem cells that allow you to live with the amount of chemo. The chemo is what is the MS cure, if in fact it does that. And it was, I felt very taken care of. I had some complications, but overall, it went pretty smoothly. I'm pretty good if I'm prepared. If someone says this is gonna be horrible, I'm like, not that bad. When someone says, when I left the hospital, he's like, you're great, you're great. And I'm like, oh shit. When someone says you're supposed to be great and don't feel great yet, you feel you failed. When someone says it's going to be hard and you do well, you're like, triumph. So it was okay, but my hair's still not growing in.
Neither is mine. So
we go to the same hairdresser, but no, that was a small thing. I never minded hair loss or any of the things that would be ego involved. My dream is to lie next to my son at night and be there as long as he needs me, and hopefully do something for people, because I've heard so much from people with chronic diseases or MS. They're scared, and they don't know when it's going to get worse, and I didn't know anything about it.
Well, you've become an icon and a hero for so many, not just with MS, but with all chronic diseases. And for that, the medical community thanks you, and for what you're doing, we all thank you.
Thank you.
And Mehmet, I can't underestimate that you. I mean, one of the great doctors actually being so vulnerable and making a learning moment, something in your family, making a learning moment for others, is so powerful, and we all look up to that. I look up to that. And so thank you both for being you and for what you've done for everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.